The lights of the grand Marcellus Hall shimmered like polished gemstones, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers and casting warm gold across the crowded ballroom. Laughter, music, clinking glasses, fragments of conversations, all of it swirled together in a pleasant chaos that made the night feel alive, extravagant, and dangerously unpredictable. Frank Walker stood near the bar, nursing a glass of sparkling water rather than the bourbon he usually preferred. His instincts were too alert tonight. He felt like a man waiting for a storm he couldn't yet see but could somehow smell in the air. The kind of storm that made him feel the hairs on his arms rise for no rational reason. He had learned long ago to trust those instincts, and they thrummed especially loud tonight. Perhaps it was because the warning had come earlier in the evening, quietly, unexpectedly, and from a man Frank barely knew. Marek Laya. The name itself held a strange weight. Marek was an investment consultant who had married into a politically influential family, and though Frank had met him only a handful of times, Marek was the type of man who remembered people's weaknesses better than their names. The kind who catalogued every insecurity like data points. And yet Marek had approached Frank in an unusually serious tone just hours before the gala began. "Frank," he'd said, "keep an eye on your wife tonight. I don't know the details, but something feels off. Someone here," he paused, glancing around, "might try to get close to her. Very close." Frank hadn't wanted to interrogate the man. Marek wasn't the type to spread meaningless rumors. He also wasn't the type to care enough to warn someone without reason. That alone concerned Frank more than the words themselves. So now Frank stood there, scanning the floor. And then he saw her. Brooke. His wife of 6 years, wearing the midnight blue dress that hugged her waist and accentuated the gentle curve of her shoulders. Her auburn hair curled loosely down her back, catching the light each time she moved. She looked like a woman carved from sunlight and secrets. And tonight, she was not dancing alone. She was dancing with Lelia. Lelia Thorne, public relations consultant, notorious flirt, woman of too many late-night rumors, a woman who collected men's attention like souvenirs and had a reputation for whispering suggestions into ears that didn't belong to her. Frank's jaw stiffened. It wasn't that Brooke couldn't dance with her. She was free to socialize, mingle, enjoy herself. They always gave each other space. Trust was the cornerstone of their marriage. But tonight something about Brooke's behavior was just different. Her smile was too bright, her laughter too quick, her body too relaxed in Lelia's hands. Frank's eyes narrowed. Lelia's palm lingered at Brooke's lower back a little too long. Brooke didn't push it away. She even leaned in slightly, as if to hear something whispered in her ear. Frank felt tension coil inside his chest. Then, as he was about to step forward and walk toward them, the music abruptly faded, cut off mid-beat when the orchestra paused to tune up. Conversation softened. Movement slowed. And in the sudden quiet, Frank watched as Brooke and Lelia broke from the dancing space. But instead of heading back toward their table, Brooke slipped away toward the far hallway that led to the restrooms. Lelia followed her with her eyes and bit her lip, smiling in a way Frank didn't like. Not at all. Frank took a breath, set down his glass, and began walking. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Brooke disappeared around the corner, leaving the ballroom's golden glow behind. Frank followed, not quickly enough to seem controlling, but not slowly enough to be casual. Every step echoed with a decision he hadn't yet made, but knew he'd face soon. The hallway was cooler, darker, lined with framed photographs of past galas and political donors. Frank paused near one of the marble pillars, listening. A whisper. A soft, muffled sound. He couldn't make out words, only tension. He took another step forward. But as he rounded the corridor, a different scene unfolded before him. Lelia and 3 others, members of her small entourage, stepped into his path. Frank stopped. "So sorry, Frank," Lelia purred, her head tilted slightly. "But this area is for staff only." He gave her a long look. "Since when? I've been attending events here for a decade." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Policies change. Her entourage, 2 men and another woman, all shifted subtly, blocking the path as if they had rehearsed the move. They were not threatening in the traditional sense, but their posture was a deliberate barrier. Frank had dealt with politicians, CEOs, and snakes wearing silk ties. He recognized coordinated interference when he saw it. He also recognized intimidation, which was amusing because they had chosen the wrong person to try it on. Frank folded his hands behind his back, his posture relaxed, his voice calm enough to make Lelia blink. "Lelia," he said, "I have dismantled more manipulative schemes this year than you've concocted in your lifetime. So please, step aside." Her painted smile flickered. One of the men shifted his stance. The woman's brows furrowed. Frank's tone didn't change. Move. Whether it was his voice, the paradoxical softness in it, or simply the way the air seemed to tighten around him, they moved aside without further argument. Lelia attempted a casual shrug, but her eyes betrayed her irritation. "Suit yourself." Frank brushed past them and continued toward the back hallway. He found Brooke near the exit leading to the loading dock, the kind of place guests had no reason to be during a gala. "Brooke," he called calmly. She startled slightly, turning toward him as if she had been caught stealing something, rather than simply standing alone. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "I just needed some air." "Air is outside," he replied. "This is a storage corridor." Her irritation flickered instantly. "Frank, not now. Don't start." He studied her. Her pupils were dilated, her cheeks flushed. She looked excited, nervous, like someone with a secret that burned under her skin, demanding to be acted upon. "Where were you going?" Frank asked. She folded her arms. "Does it matter?" "Yes," he said. "Tonight? It matters very much." Brooke opened her mouth, but her words were swallowed by the memory of what happened earlier. Because tonight had not begun here. Tonight had begun with a completely different encounter. Several hours before, Brooke had been drifting through the cocktail reception when she collided with someone, literally bumped shoulder first into a tall man standing near the champagne display. Her breath caught. Marek Lely. He was famous. Not Hollywood famous, but infamous in the political and business circles that orbited power. The type of man who moved money with a phone call and destroyed reputations with a smile. Brooke's cheeks flushed red instantly. I'm sorry," she stammered. Marek turned, and when his eyes locked on hers, he grinned like a wolf who had found a door left accidentally open. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice smooth like aged whiskey. "You just improved my evening." She laughed nervously, brushing a curl behind her ear. "I didn't mean to bump into you." "And I didn't mean to enjoy it," he replied, leaning closer. "But here we are." Her skin tingled. She had seen him before, on magazine covers, financial panels, Interviews? Frank had even consulted for an organization Marek sponsored years ago. Marek was magnetic, dangerously so, and he knew it. "Dance with me," he said. Brooke blinked. "What?" "Dance." She hesitated only a second, but that second stretched into a betrayal. And then she agreed. Back in the hallway, facing her husband, Brooke looked tense, as if torn between shame and defiance. Frank kept his voice steady. "I saw how he looked at you." Brooke swallowed. "And I saw how you looked back." Her jaw clenched. She looked away. "I just wanted a moment," she whispered. "A moment of what?" Frank asked. She didn't answer. Frank took a breath. He wasn't angry. He wasn't jealous. He was disappointed. And that emotion ran deeper than any rage could. At that exact moment, a figure appeared behind them in the doorway. A tall silhouette, confident steps, controlled presence. Marek. Frank stiffened instinctively. Brooke inhaled sharply, and Marek walked forward like a man who owned the space simply by existing inside it. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, voice low, smooth, dripping with intention. Brooke froze. Frank turned to face him fully. Marek's eyes flicked between them, and he smirked. And then, loud enough to echo down the hallway, he said the line that would later make the entire ballroom fall silent. "Brooke, you didn't tell him yet?" The air itself froze. Brooke's breath hitched. Frank's pulse stopped for a full second. The night had just shifted. The line had been spoken, and nothing, from this moment forward, would ever be the same. The moment Marek's words echoed down the narrow hallway, the atmosphere thickened like storm clouds, gathering seconds before a lightning strike. Brooke's eyes widened, and her body stiffened, as though someone had just injected ice into her bloodstream. The color rushed from her cheeks, only to return twice as red. She looked trapped, cornered, exposed, the expression of a woman who had run out of exits. Frank didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Marek as though trying to decipher the exact shape and weight of the threat standing in front of him. "Tell me what?" Frank asked finally, his tone quiet, almost disturbingly calm. Brooke opened her mouth, but Marek raised a hand casually, as though the two of them were merely discussing the weather rather than the edges of betrayal. "Brooke," he murmured, "it's fine, really. Secrets are delicate things, but they always show their face eventually." He shifted his gaze to Frank. "Your wife and I had a very enlightening conversation on the dance floor." Brooke's voice trembled. "Marek, stop." Frank's eyes flicked toward her, cold and observant. "Enlightening? How?" Marek smiled slowly. "A man doesn't reveal everything at once, especially not in a hallway this dimly lit." He took another step forward. "But since your wife seems unwilling to say the words..." Brooke exhaled sharply. "Don't. I'll say them for her." Frank raised his chin slightly, waiting, braced. Marek continued. "Your wife wants to leave with me tonight." The words fell with the force of a hammer. Brooke gasped. Marek!" But Marek didn't acknowledge her panic. His eyes stayed on Frank, and something in them gleamed with arrogance, or hunger, or the thrill of a challenge he intended to win. Frank's pulse thrummed at a slow, deliberate rhythm. His fingers curled slightly at his sides, not with violence, but with restraint. In the dim light he studied his wife, the way her mouth trembled, the way her hands fidgeted at her sides, the way her legs seemed ready to run, but rooted by shame. She didn't deny it. That silence burned. Frank finally shifted his gaze back to Marek. "You're mistaken," he said. Marek raised an amused brow. "About what?" There isn't a universe where my wife leaves this building with you." Brooke flinched. Marek chuckled, his voice smooth with mockery. "We'll see." Frank took a step toward him, his posture relaxed but commanding, like a man accustomed to walking into meetings with hostile politicians and walking out with everything he needed. "Marek," Frank said evenly, "you should walk away from this conversation." Marek tilted his head. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Frank replied. "I'm offering you the smartest choice you'll be given all night." Silence swelled for a moment. And then a voice broke it. Not Marek's, but Brooke's. "Frank, please, don't make this worse." Frank's eyes snapped toward her. "Worse?" he repeated. "Is this, what I walked in on, not already worse to you?" Brooke shook her head, tears welling, breathing shallow. I needed space. I needed to feel like myself. Marek was just being kind. He didn't—" "Brooke," Frank interrupted softly, dangerously. "I watched him dance with you. I saw his hand on your waist. I saw the way you leaned into him. Don't insult both of us by calling that kindness." Marek smirked. Brooke looked away. Frank stepped closer to her. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "Were you going to leave with him? Even for a moment?" Her lips trembled. She said nothing. That silence spoke volumes. Marek placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. And that was the last mistake he made tonight. Frank's expression hardened, just for a second, but enough for Brooke to notice and jerk away from Marek's touch as if burned. Marek raised his hand in mock apology. "Sensitive, isn't she?" Frank exhaled. "Brooke, look at me." She reluctantly turned her eyes toward him. His voice was calm, painfully calm. "What exactly did he promise you?" Her face broke. "Frank, please, don't ask me that." "I am asking." She swallowed hard, tearing her gaze away. Marek answered instead. "An unforgettable night," he murmured. "A fantasy come true." Frank's jaw tightened. "And what did you tell him?" Brooke squeezed her eyes shut, tears escaping. I didn't agree. I didn't say no." Frank felt something inside him crack, not loudly, not violently. It was a soft fracture, a quiet shattering that hurt more precisely because of how muted it was. He took a slow breath. Then another. "I want to understand," he said. Voice steady, yet brittle. "At what moment did our marriage become so fragile that you could hear a promise from a stranger and not reject it immediately?" Brooke sobbed softly. Marek folded his arms, watching with the satisfaction of a man who thrived on destruction. Frank turned sharply toward him. "You're done here," Marek smirked. "I don't think she's done." Brooke choked out. "Marek, please don't." But Marek lifted his chin, ignoring her. "I see people's desires very clearly," he said. "And your wife—" Frank stepped closer, voice lowering. "Say another word about my wife's desires," he murmured, "and you'll be spitting those teeth out of your own mouth." Marek didn't flinch. Brooke gasped. "Frank!" But Frank didn't touch Marek, didn't raise a hand, didn't even shift his stance. It was not a threat of violence, just a promise of consequences. And Marek, despite the arrogance, finally sensed it. His smirk faded slightly. Frank turned back to Brooke. "No more running," he said. "We're going to talk. Now." Brooke nodded numbly, but Marek wasn't done. He leaned in one last time and whispered, not quietly enough, "You'll regret choosing him over me." Frank looked at him with a calm that chilled the hallway. "No, she'll regret believing you were anything more than a temporary thrill." Marek's expression hardened, but Frank ignored him, guiding Brooke back toward the main corridor. The storm had broken. But it was only beginning. When they stepped back into the banquet hall, the music was still playing. Cheerful, lively, painfully out of place. Couples twirled, clinked glasses, laughed under the golden lights suspended like stars. It felt like Frank and Brooke had walked out of a war zone and into a dream, or a nightmare wearing its mask too well. Brooke's steps were small and hesitant, as though the carpet itself burned her feet. Frank's walk was steady, composed. But inside him, a fire had already begun its quiet, methodical spread. He guided her to an empty table in the corner, far from the dance floor, far from prying eyes. "Sit," he said softly. She did. Across the room, Marek lingered near the bar, not interfering, not approaching, but watching, like a shark circling the edge of a reef. Frank took his seat opposite his wife, folding his hands on the table. His eyes didn't waver. Brooke trembled beneath his gaze. "Why him?" Frank asked quietly. Of all people. She stared at her hands. "It wasn't about him? Then what was it about?" Brooke took a shuddering breath. "I felt invisible." Frank blinked. "Invisible? You're calm. You're collected. You're always thinking 5 steps ahead. You're impossible to read. Sometimes I don't know if you still want me or if you're just living next to me." Frank absorbed that in silence. Brooke wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "Marek made me feel seen. Wanted." "And I didn't?" Frank asked. She flinched. "You did. Before. But then life got quiet." Frank leaned back slowly. "I didn't realize you needed noise to feel loved." "That's not fair," she whispered. "I'm not trying to be fair," he replied. "I'm trying to understand." Her lip trembled. "I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't go looking for him. He just noticed me." Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. "And that was enough to make you forget who you are? Who we are?" Brooke shut her eyes again, shoulders shaking. "I never meant for it to go this far." "But it did," Frank said. "The moment you didn't say no." She sobbed softly. "Frank, please." He raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to steady the moment. "Brooke, what exactly did you want from tonight? The truth, not the excuse." She hesitated. The pause was long, heavy. "I wanted to feel alive," she whispered finally. Frank's expression didn't change, but inside something slid into place. A conclusion. A shift. A silent understanding that hurt far more than any confession. "Alive," he repeated. Brooke nodded, ashamed. "Yes. You thought you'd find that in a stranger's arms?" "I don't know what I thought," she choked. "I was stupid. I was hurting. And then you walked in and saw..." Her voice cracked. "I ruined everything." Frank looked down at his hands. "You didn't ruin everything." She exhaled shakily, a hint of hope in her eyes. "You ended it," he continued. "I'm just stepping out of the rubble." Brooke covered her mouth, tears spilling. He watched her for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in his chest, like a blade. "Brooke, did you already sleep with him?" Her breath caught. No, Frank, I swear." He held her gaze. "Look at me and say it." She lifted her eyes. They were red, raw, terrified. "I didn't sleep with him." Frank believed her. But something about the way she said it made him realize something else. There were other things she was hiding. Before he could respond, a sudden vibration against the table startled both of them. Brooke jerked violently. Frank lowered his eyes. Her phone, forgotten in her clutch, lit up with a new message. From Marek. He didn't touch the device, didn't even lean toward it. He simply watched Brooke's face drain of all remaining color. She snatched the phone instantly, turning it face down. Frank remained still, calm, watching. "What did he send you?" he asked. Brooke shook her head rapidly. "It's nothing. Nothing, Frank. Show me." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" Her silence was an admission. Frank exhaled slowly, once, deeply, controlled. Then he stood. Brooke's panic rose immediately, raw and choking. "Frank, please don't leave. Don't walk away from me." "I'm not walking away," he said. "Not yet." "Then where are you going?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped away from the table, moving toward the bar. Marek saw him coming and straightened, a smug little curl tugging at his mouth. Frank approached him. Not quickly, not aggressively. Just a steady, deliberate walk of a man who had made a decision. "I'm going to ask you one question," Frank said quietly, "and you're going to answer truthfully." Marek chuckled. "Am I?" Frank didn't blink. "What exactly did you send her?" Marek's eyes sparkled. "A reminder." "Of what?" "That I'm not done with her." Frank's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Marek leaned against the bar, confidence dripping from him. "She told me something you should probably know." Frank didn't move, didn't react. "What?" he said simply. Marek smirked. "She said she's not sure she wants to stay married." The words echoed through Frank like distant thunder, not shocking, but resonant, real. Marek added softly, "She's halfway out the door, Frank. I just held it open." Frank considered this silently. Then he spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just firmly. "Walk away from her, and from me." Marek scoffed. "Or what? You'll hit me?" "No," Frank replied. "I won't need to." Marek frowned slightly at that, thrown off by the calm certainty. Frank stepped back, his voice low but cutting. "Men like you burn out fast. You think you're fire, but you're just gasoline waiting for a spark. Brooke saw that tonight. She'll remember." Marek's smirk faltered. Frank didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, back toward the table where Brooke waited, a trembling silhouette under the soft golden lights. When he sat down again, Brooke whispered, "What did he say?" Frank looked at her. Really looked. "He said," Frank murmured, "that you're not sure you want to stay married." Brooke froze, horrified. I never said that. I swear, I would never—" Frank interrupted gently. "But are you sure, Brooke?" Her breath came fast and uneven. "Yes, I'm sure. I want us. I want our marriage. I want—" "No." Frank shook his head. "You want to feel alive." Brooke's eyes flooded again. Frank leaned forward slightly. "Tell me the truth. Every single piece of it. Because if you don't, this marriage dies tonight. Not because of what you almost did, but because of what you're still hiding." Brooke's lips parted. The truth hovered on the edge of her breath. And then a shadow fell across their table. They both looked up. Marek stood there. Again. Only this time, he wasn't smirking. He was holding Brooke's phone. Brooke's face went white. "Marek, what are you—" He placed the phone gently on the table, turned it face up. A preview message glowed on the screen. A picture. A hotel room mirror selfie. Brooke in the reflection, wearing a dress she no longer owned. Frank's heart didn't race. It slowed. The caption beneath the photo. "Round 2 tonight?" And that was the moment the ground shifted permanently beneath both their lives. For a moment the world stopped. Conversations around them blurred into a distant hum. The chandelier light flickered across Brooke's frozen face, illuminating the horror that spread through her like ink in water. Frank didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. He simply stared at the screen glowing between them like a silent verdict. A hotel room mirror. Brooke's silhouette. A dress she hadn't worn in months. Her hair styled the way she used to when she wanted to feel desired. The caption, "Round 2 tonight." Brooke's lips parted in a silent gasp. "Frank, this isn't—" Merrick lifted a lazy eyebrow. "You forgot I saved that." Frank shifted his gaze slowly up to him. Not furious, not distraught. Just done. Brooke grabbed the phone, trembling violently. "This isn't what it looks like. This photo is from years ago. I swear, Frank, it's from a work conference." 2 years ago, Merrick corrected with a smile. "But she sent it to me 3 months back." Brooke's face collapsed. "I didn't send it to him. I didn't." Frank remained silent. "Tell him," Merrick taunted. "Tell him about that night we talked after your firm's awards dinner. You remember. You were upset, vulnerable, wanted to feel—" "Stop!" Brooke screamed, standing so fast her chair tipped over. She shook her head frantically, tears splattering onto the tablecloth. "He's lying. Frank, he's twisting everything. Please, please look at me." Frank did, and she saw it. Not hatred, not rage. Just the calm of a man who'd reached the end of the bridge and realized it simply wasn't there anymore. "Brooke," he said softly, "what else didn't you tell me?" Her knees buckled. She sank back down onto the edge of the table, shaking uncontrollably. I never cheated," she whispered. "Never. Not physically. Not once. I swear to you, I swear on everything." "But emotionally?" Frank asked. She shut her eyes. "I tried to forget it ever happened." Marek crossed his arms, enjoying every second. Frank turned to him slowly. "Give me one reason not to break your jaw." Marek smirked. "You won't, because you're too controlled, too civilized." Frank stood up. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marek took an involuntary step back. Before anything could happen, a sudden presence appeared behind Marek. A broad-shouldered man in a black security suit, jaw tight, eyes locked. It was the event's head of security, Marjorie Klein. A woman built like a wall and twice as intimidating. "Sir," she said to Frank calmly, "is this man bothering you?" Marek scoffed. "Bothering? We're having a conversation." Frank didn't look at Marek anymore. "He threatened my marriage." Marek rolled his eyes. "Oh, please." "And he threatened me," Frank added. That wiped the smile off Marek's face. Marjorie stepped closer. "Is that true?" Marek's hand drifted near his jacket, too casually. Frank noticed. So did Marjorie. "Don't," she warned. But Marek's ego outweighed his sense. He reached. Shining metal flashed beneath the fabric. Everything blurred. Brooke screamed. Glass shattered somewhere behind them. Chairs scraped. People ducked. Frank moved instantly, instinctively, fueled by training most people didn't know he had. In one motion, he yanked Brooke toward him, shielding her with his body, pivoting away from the barrel of the gun. Marek lifted the weapon. A deafening trio of cracks tore through the hall. 3 shots. Fast. Precise. Not from Marek. Marek's body jerked violently backward, legs buckling as he crashed into a cluster of chairs. The gun clattered from his hand and spun across the polished floor. Silence. Frank slowly turned. Marjorie stood there, arms extended. Her security-issued firearm smoking faintly. Her face was stone, her breathing calm, her stance perfect. She had shot him cleanly. Center mass. People screamed, gasped, backed away. Marek wheezed on the floor, hands pressed to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. Frank approached him cautiously, Brooke clinging to his arm with shaking hands. Marek coughed, choking on the taste of blood and fury. "It was just a joke." Marjorie's voice was ice. "Pulling a gun on a guest is not a joke." Frank crouched beside him, not with cruelty, but with clarity. "You played with fire," he said quietly. "And this time, you weren't the only one holding the match." Marek's breathing stuttered. His eyes rolled. Frank pressed 2 fingers to the pulse point on his neck. Nothing. He stood. "It's over," he said. Police swept through the doors minutes later. Statements were taken, evidence collected, witnesses separated. The whole event replayed through shaky voices and wide eyes. Marjorie's actions were quickly deemed justified. Frank was thanked for his calm cooperation. Brooke barely spoke at all. Hours later, when the crowd had thinned and the world had quieted, Frank and Brooke walked out into the cool night air. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself. Not from cold, from shame. "Frank," her voice was small. "I didn't sleep with him. Not then. Not ever. Not even close. I swear to you with everything I am." "I know," Frank said. Her head snapped up, hope flickering. "You do?" "Yes. I could see it in your eyes tonight." She nearly collapsed in relief. But then he added, "But there's something else you're not telling me." Her relief shattered instantly. Frank looked at her with gentle exhaustion. "You didn't cheat with your body, but you crossed something with your mind, with your heart." Brooke broke. Tears poured silently down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for any of this. I just felt lost and weak and wanting to feel something." Frank nodded slowly. "And I could have helped you with that, if you told me. I didn't know how. That's the problem." Brooke reached for him, voice trembling. "Please, Frank, don't give up on us. I'll go to therapy. I'll explain everything. Brooke." He took her hands gently, holding them for a long moment. "We'll figure out the logistics. But tonight, something changed." Her breath hitched. "Changed how?" Frank looked up at the sky. Dark, moonlit, quiet. "I lost trust," he said softly. "Not love, but trust." Brooke covered her mouth to contain a sob. "And I don't know," he continued, "if trust can survive what happened tonight." "But do you want to try?" she whispered desperately. Frank met her gaze. Then he asked the one question he hadn't dared voice until now. "If Marek never died, if I never walked in, if no one stopped you, would you have gone with him?" Brooke froze. Silence stretched. Her lips opened. A tear slid down her cheek. Her answer never came. And that silence was the real answer. Frank stepped back. Brooke reached for him, but he gently removed her hands from his. "Good night, Brooke." He walked toward the parking lot. She stayed standing under the yellow glow of the entrance lights, shaking, crying, realizing far too late that her silence was louder than any confession. As Frank pulled away in his car, one thought sat painfully, unavoidably in his mind. She didn't cheat with her body, but she almost cheated with her soul. And sometimes that was worse.